Welcome to Let's Talk Property, an informal podcast show all about the UK property and mortgage market. I'm Neezam, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Lee. Whether you're a seasoned property investor or just starting to think about buying your first home, this podcast is for you. We'll be discussing a range of topics, including the latest market trends, tips for finding the perfect property, and how to secure your best mortgage deal. So join us as we explore the world of property and help you make informed decisions about your next property purchase. Today's episode, we are going to do a bit of a jargon buster episode. So it's kind of like a little mini episode, but we're going to dive into the top kind of 18. It sounds like a lot, but the top 18 most commonly used jargons, phrases across the industry. And then we're going to decipher what they mean so they make sense to anyone that's buying for the first time.
Ooh, I feel like this might be a bit of a test for me as well, because I don't even know what these words are. So it's going to be an interesting one.
I think you'll be fine. I think you'll be fine. I think it's they are phrases that are common. So I tried to search for the ones that are the most commonly used. Some of them you might already know the answers to if you're listening to this, even if you're a first-time buyer. But to be honest, some of them, even home movers and people that have bought properties before, just because you've done it doesn't mean you understood everything that was said to you. And this is something, we see all the time. People just kind of get bombarded with different language and you're left sort of scratching your head on kind of going, does it mean things are moving forward? Yes, great. Do I need to understand it? Maybe not. But I think, as always, if you have an understanding of what the words are, you can understand a bit more around the process. You can make sure you're sort of planning to buy a property, and it takes away, I think, a lot of the anxieties and nervousness around when you're buying a property if you understand what things mean.
That's a really good point. There's so much jargon used in the process, isn't there? You've got an estate agent who might have their own sort of jargon. You've got the mortgage broker. You've got the solicitor as well. There's loads of different sort of bits of jargon. So I think this is going to be a really useful episode. It's going to be a good one.
Real, and that's exactly what I thought too. So I think it's what I've tried to do is not just look at solicitor jargon or estate agent jargon or mortgage jargon. It's everything. So what are the most common 18 words or phrases across solicitors, like I said, solicitors, estate agents, surveyors, and mortgage advisors and mortgage brokers? What are they? So this is probably not going to be that engaging between you and I, because I'm just going to read out a list and then explain what they are. So what I'll do is I'll say the word and then I'll give a brief explanation of what it means. And hopefully you just keep this podcast episode like bookmarks maybe. And then when it comes to buying a property, if you're completely clueless, then just come back to this one and hopefully we'll be able to decipher it for you. So shall we dive in?
Yes, go.
Cool. Number one is gazumping. So gazumping is one we've used before. That is when a seller accepts an offer from a buyer, but then decides to accept a higher offer from someone else before contracts are exchanged. And that is something that we don't see too often, but can happen. So that's the first one. Second one is conveyancing. And this is one that a lot of people get confused between conveyancing, solicitors, surveyors, who does what. So conveyancing is, to be really clear, the legal process of transferring property ownership from the seller to the buyer. It's as simple as that. It is the legal work that is involved when it comes to buying or selling a property in the UK. So conveyancing, who does that? Conveyancer, i.e. a property solicitor. It's all the same thing. Number three is a chain. So I know you've covered this off very recently, but this is another one a lot of people get confused of, especially when estate agents are talking about chains, or is the chain ready? Is there a chain? That is basically, like you've said before, it's a sequence of properties where the buyers and sellers are linked together because each person is dependent on the other. So if I'm buying a property from you and you're buying a property from someone else, that is a chain of all three of us. So if one of us pulls out, the whole chain potentially collapses. So that's chain. Number four is LTV. So that's loan to value. Now, this is mortgage jargon. So this is the percentage of the property's value that a lender is willing to lend you. So, for example, if a property is valued at 100K and the loan to value, the LTV is 80%, you'll need a deposit of 20% to bridge that gap between the mortgage of 80% and your deposit of 20%. So if you've got a 5% deposit, you will need a 95% LTV, like loan to value mortgage. Number 5 is a fixed rate mortgage. I'm not going to dive into what it is, but it's a fixed rate mortgage. Is a mortgage with a set interest rate for a certain period of time. So that's usually 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or 7 or 10 years, even on the longer ones. That is a fixed rate mortgage. Obviously, you'll need to understand that a bit more in depth, and that's where a mortgage advisor will help you. Stamp duty. I'm going to take a pause after this one. Stamp duty is the tax you pay when buying a property above a certain value. Why is it called stamp duty? I have no idea. I don't know if you know. There's got to be a reason for it, knowing this country and the jargon we use when it comes to property industry. But yeah, I'm sure someone can tell us why it's called stamp duty. But that is literally, it's tax. It's tax you pay when buying a property. And
well, I've just quickly Googled it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I've just quickly Googled stamp duty. Proof of payment of the tax that was evidenced by a stamp. So back in the day, I think it was officers of the Crown were appointed to oversee the physical stamping of documents and the payment of duty.
Oh, right. So it's a stamp, a physical stamp on a document. Say you've paid your
that's
tax.
It. Yeah. Physical stamp. So yeah. So I guess it was back when they stamped the documents. Yeah, there you go.
So
we've learned something.
There you go. That's answered that question. Thanks for that. That is okay. That's an interesting one. So stamp duty. Number 7, survey, translation and inspection of the property's condition to identify any potential issues. Obviously, there's a lot more than that, but that is what a survey is. And again, that is where we talked about conveyancing, solicitors, surveyors. People get them all confused. A conveyancer is a property solicitor, so bundle those together. A surveyor is someone completely separate who's actually looking at the condition and the structure of the property itself and its physical condition. So a survey is something that a surveyor does. It's not something that generally is done automatically. It's someone, usually you'd have to instruct to survey yourself, and it's not something you have to do either. So if you don't get one done, no one's going to kind of pull you up and say, where's your survey? But at the same time, it's a huge risk of buying a property without a survey. So that's what a survey is. Number 8, completion. We talk about completion a lot. I think this is one that solicitors, estate agents, and mortgage advisors particularly use. Completion is the final step when the property becomes officially yours and you get your keys. So it's the day you can basically pick your keys up and move in. That is what's called completion. If you want to think about it as completion of the purchase, effectively. And then that brings me on to the next one. Any guesses what the next one is?
Exchange of contracts.
Exchange of contracts. Exactly. So that is the point just before you complete, where in order to tie everyone into the purchase and make it all official, exchange of contracts is the point where the buyer and the seller both commit to the transaction and it becomes legally binding. That is a point of where solicitors will literally exchange contracts with each other that you've signed to say, yeah, we're buying this, we're happy with everything. That's right towards the end of the purchase. It's just before completion, but that is the point of exchanging contracts. Freehold is the next one. So freehold, a lot of people understand the concept of freehold and leasehold. Let's cover them. So freehold is when you own the property and the land it stands on with no time limit. Although a little bit of trivia there is actually you don't who actually owns the land. It's not you. It's the Crown, isn't it?
Yes.
Who owns all the land in the UK. In reality. So yeah, but they're not hopefully going to take it off you. So freehold is when you own the property and the land with no time limit, and a leasehold is when you own the property but not the land. So the leasehold properties come with the lease agreement specifying conditions and duration. So you might have a block of flats where there is a freeholder who owns the block of flats and the land that it sits on, and then what they'll do is, let's say there's 10 flats in there, they'll create 10 separate leases, and let's say they're 100-year leases. So every single flat you could buy individually on the separate leases, but you don't own the land underneath it, and also it has a duration on it. So once that lease expires, it reverts back to the freeholder that takes possession. In reality, what happens is you will then, as a leaseholder, apply for an extension to your lease. And then again, that's where you negotiate with your freeholder, and that's where usually a fee is payable as well, and not often quite a hefty fee. Covenant. This is one that most people won't know, I expect. So covenant, solicitors. Do you know what a covenant is, Lee? Shall I put you on the spot?
Oh, is it something to do with? Is it a restriction of some sort, or a rule? I suppose. Is it something along those lines?
You do know your stuff, don't you? Did you Google that as well?
I'm sweating. I was sweating a little bit. Oh God!
I didn't prep you for that, did I? Covenant is a very, very, very good legal obligations or restrictions associated with the property. So if you have a covenant on your on the property you're buying, if with land registry, there may be a covenant registered with land registry on the title. That can be anything. That could be absolutely anything. Anyone can apply a covenant to property deeds. Often it's things like giving right of way. So if you're a really good example is my brother, for example. He owns a house where he has a covenant on his title because his next door neighbor has to come through their garden to take the bins out in order to get to the front. So there's a right of access there. So they have to grant right of access to the neighbor to let him come through but obviously you can't just sit in the garden and enjoy the sun. It's only to sort of take the bins out. So that's what a covenant is. Mortgage term, the length of a time. So this again is where some people get confused with fixed rate term or initial rate term and mortgage term. Mortgage term is the entire term of your mortgage. So when your mortgage term ends, you are mortgage free. So that is not the 2-year fixed rate or the 5-year tracker rate. It's the total term, which is typically anywhere around 25 to 35 or even 40 years nowadays as well. That's mortgage term. Deposit, number 14, we're nearly there, is the upfront sum of money you pay to secure the property. So deposit, in a nutshell, is what you are contributing towards that purchase. So we said earlier about LTV. If you've got an LTV of 90% on the mortgage, you've got 90% mortgage, your deposit needs to be 10%. That, again, we can explore that in a separate episode in terms of what can form your deposit. Loads of different ways you can use a deposit. It doesn't have to just be cash in your bank, but that is what deposit is. Equity, really, really common one. Lots of people don't understand equity. And as we're coming into a period where we're talking about house prices coming up and coming down, equity, negative equity is something that a lot of people will be talking about. Equity is the difference between your property's worth, so the property value, and the amount you owe on the mortgage. So in theory, it's your ownership stake. It's your equity in your home. So if you sold your house for 100 grand and you had a mortgage of 50 grand, you walk away with 50 grand. That is your equity. You have 50 grand's worth of equity in the property. Anything to add just before we dive into the last 3, Lee?
No, I think that's really well covered. I think what I have understood is there is some weird and wonderful words that we use, isn't there, in the property market, especially gazumping. But yeah, no, all good, mate.
Again, that might be one to Google while I go through the next 3, where gazumping comes from, because that is a mad word. Agreement in principle is a document from a mortgage lender confirming how much they'd be willing to lend you, helping you understand your budget before house hunting. We are banging that drum all the time, Lee and I. Getting an agreement in principle for your mortgage is the first thing you should do. First thing you should do before you start looking for your home. So if you're ready with your deposit and you're ready to start going to an estate agent and start viewing houses, before you do that, get an agreement in principle, because that is the bit where you know how much you can borrow in the mortgage, what the monthly payments are, and is it within the budget that you can afford? Because otherwise you're wasting your time, you're wasting seller's time, wasting estate agent's time. So that is an agreement in principle, also known as AIP, also known as a decision in principle or a DIP. There's multiple words for it, but it's all the same thing. How many are we doing? 15, 16, 17 is chain-free property. So this is the opposite to a chain. So it is where a property doesn't form part of a chain, makes the buying process smoother. It's not reliant on any other sales. So really good example, if I'm buying a property from you, Lee, and you're not buying onwards. So if, let's say you're actually going to go and live with your family, and I currently do live with my family, but I'm buying your house. There's only one property involved in that, so actually there's very little risk of anything going wrong because of there not being a chain. It's not reliant on you buying another property. It's not reliant on me selling another property. So that is what a chain-free property is. And number 18, if you're still tuned in and listening, is valuation, property valuation. Really straightforward. It is the assessment of a property's estimated value, typically so this is effectively a mortgage valuation, typically conducted by a mortgage lender to determine the amount they're willing to lend to you. So if you're applying for a mortgage, any bank or building society is going to want to verify the property value of the property they're loaning you the money against. And the reason for that is because if you ever stop making mortgage payments, they want to step in, repossess the property, sell it, and make sure they've got enough to clear the mortgage that you owe them. So a property valuation or mortgage valuation, that is the real basic survey. But depending on what your deposit is, depending on who you're applying with, depending on lots of different factors, that could even be a virtual valuation where the bank goes click a button and it tells them that, yep, we believe the property is valued at that. So again, if you're relying on the mortgage valuation to look at the actual condition of the property, and if you think, oh, well, there won't be any problems with this property because the bank are happy with it, don't do that, because they may not even send anyone out to even have a look at it. Or they might do what's called a drive-by valuation, where they do send someone to look at it, but they don't get out their car. They sit and they just sort of drive by, have a little look outside it, make sure it's not falling apart, make sure it's got a roof, make sure it's not on fire, and then tick it off and say, yeah, we're happy with it, hopefully. And that's not a dig at surveyors, by the way. That is just the process. So yeah, I think that is covering 18 most commonly used phrases when buying a home. Is there anything I've missed there? Any obvious ones, do you think?
No, some cracking jargon. I think the only one I would add is, and I don't know if you covered similar, is a lot of the time we see property offer and mortgage offer. So the offers, the offer, what they call the offers. So yeah, property offer is when you're putting a bid, I suppose, on a property itself. That is your property offer. So you're putting a bid of £200,000 down. That is a property offer. And then a mortgage offer is when your mortgage is fully approved. It's in writing and they say, here is your mortgage of XYZ, and the banks put it in a contractual form of writing, and that document is called a mortgage offer. But other than that, I think it's a great session, mate. Really good session. I did Google what where gazumping come from. It's quite interesting. It's a Yiddish originally, and then moved over to English back in 1920s, and it was to overcharge or cheat or even swindle. So it's quite an interesting, quite an interesting word used there.
Origin.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting one. There you go. So
brilliant, excellent. What I was going to say is maybe we can. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I imagine gazundering, because that's the opposite, is where the buyer then. But that's probably another one that we don't see very often. But it right towards the end, the buyer then decreases their offer for no reason. It's not gazundering if you've got a reason for it, like market's dropped or your property survey has flagged some problems. That's not necessarily gazundering. But sometimes gazundering is where a buyer might get right to the end and then go, "Oh, I'm going to give you 10 grand less now for no reason," and that's not cool. And that is, again, I guess, a similar origin, is it?
I'm just trying to Google it. It's from the north of England, but I can't get as good. The practice of unfairly demanding a reduction in price. So there's not too many origins, but it sounds like something out of Harry Potter, doesn't it? Gazumping and gazundering. It just reminds me of Harry Potter.
I feel like this podcast is turning into Countdown, and you're in Dictionary Corner, Lee, with your dictionary. Giving us definitions of things like Susie Dent. Brilliant. Yeah. Great stuff. Okay. Maybe in the description, I think with this episode, it'd be really helpful if we can add all of those. I can send you the list I've got, and maybe if we can add that in as a description in the episode. I think that would be helpful, because then people don't have to listen back. They can just refer back to to the content, your wording. Yeah. So hopefully that helps anyone that is, now or in future looking at buying. That covers a lot of different jargons and it might make sense. Great. That sounds good. I think we can wrap it up, shall we?
Yeah, good episode. So thank you for joining us for episode of Let's Talk Property. We hope you found the discussion of the UK property market informative and helpful. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the near future, feel free to send us a message. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and follow us on social media for updates on future episodes. Until next time, we'll see you in the property market.